Hi, my name is Francesca Zwang, and I am the Collections and Exhibitions Assistant here at the Fabric Workshop and Museum. This is a very special episode of Unpacking Our Stories, which celebrates the life and career of the late artist Moe Brooker. Behind me hangs Moe Brooker's quilt, Moché. This quilt was created during his residency in 1985 and is currently being featured in the first floor exhibition, Workshop As. Today, we are going to look back at his residency and honor his legacy through a conversation between past project technician Betty Leacraft and current FWM board member and friend of Moe's, Emanuel Kelly. Join us as we unpack this story.
Good morning. My name is Betty Leacraft. I'm a fiber mixed media artist, formerly employed by the Fabric Workshop from 1980 to 1986. And my position was that of construction technician. And part of my job, among many duties, was to do production work, which produced items for the museum shop, and to engineer the final product of invited artists' projects. Once their fabric came off the table, if it was something to be constructed by sewing machine, that was my job, to realize their dream from the beginning to the end of whatever their project is going to be, maybe as simple as a napkin or as complicated as a sculpture. What we're looking at now is part of the process that realized the Moe Brooker quilt. And where we are right now is a panel that was printed that became the middle of the quilt. And all of the color bars, you can see that the printed color is already there, and any place that there is a white space had to be filled in with a piece of fabric that was specific color that Moe Brooker wanted. And I can show you that on the next panel. So what we have here is probably the proof for the embroidery. And when I went to the embroidery business, what I did was I took the exact color thread that Moe wanted for each of the objects that are here, the stars and the squiggle. And if you can focus in on these little thread indicators, I have one by each star in the color that it was to be embroidered in. And with the squiggle, which is a larger thing, I had one at the end, here in the middle, and there's another one at that end. So what this did was it told the embroiderer, who I spoke to personally, exactly the color to use and where it had to go. Because I believe Moe had actually drawn the lines, and because I didn't want it to be on paper, and then if I transferred it, it wasn't exactly right. So I asked him to pencil in and put the stars exactly where he wanted them and make his color choices from the thread chart that I had available. So some of the photos that are here actually show some of that process. So right here you can see Moe looking at this middle before any embroidery is put down and before any applique white spaces have been filled in. as well, former and the late Robert Smith, who was the master printer, is going over some planning with Moe, and they're actually looking at the screen here that was going to print the colors that you see present. Another nice thing is that Moe brought his son with him. And I remember getting colored pencils or something like that and paper, so that when we had to talk and Moe had to be away from him, he had something to occupy his time. So he's about 40 now, and when I saw him at Moe's memorial, I mentioned to him that when I met him, his voice hadn't changed yet. He was still a little kid. So seeing him all these years later and knowing that he is now a successful artist, I'm sure in great part because of the professionalism of his father being imparted to him at a young age. And so here I am, Moe, and Robert Smith, and me at probably 105 pounds. So yes, there's a big difference there. Now moving down, oh yeah, let me show you the proofs for the color bars that were done by the printers. Robert Smith, Shauna Lynn Haw, I can't remember if she was still there at that time, but I'll say her name anyway, and Michelle Brigande. So that was the team that was responsible for anything that got printed. All of the colors are mixed from a white base into whatever it is the artist wants. And sometimes they may bring in a swatch of something or look through the book of colors that is compiled by the printers. So the Moe Brooker quilt was one of the highlights of my employment in the fabric workshop period of time when I was here. And I think one of the reasons is he was a Philadelphia artist of great renown, someone whom I highly respected. And I'm not saying we were close personal friends, but I knew who he was. Everyone in the art world here knew who he was. And when I found that he was going to be an artist in residence here, I was totally elated. And when we met, he and Cheryl McClinney had started their relationship, I'll say. They hadn't married yet. And when I found out that he wanted a quilt for his project, that was really great, because at that time I was not a quilt maker yet, but I came with advanced construction skills and garment making, so I just translated one set of skills to another avenue. And when he said he wanted a quilt, and I realized he was in this relationship with Cheryl McClinney, which he did tell us, I'm going to marry her. And you believed him, because you know he's a man of his convictions. So I thought about the fact that in olden days, quilts would be given as wedding presents. And one particular pattern called the wedding ring, double wedding ring, overlapping circles. I thought about that. And then knowing that his grandmother had been a quilter, it all just came together to be something quite wonderful. And another employee here, Liz McIlvain, and I actually attended his wedding and cried copious tears because he's singing "Ribbon in the Sky for Our Love" by Stevie Wonder as Cheryl McClinney is appearing at the beginning of the aisle to walk down. So that quilt has a lot of significance, of course, in his life. And in the course of their marriage, you know, I think about that. This accompanied them into their marriage. So with getting all the things together that had to make this be realized, I knew I was a garment maker, but not a quilt maker. So what I did was to consult with him to find out what his design was going to be, and of course talk to the printers. And when I saw these diagonal lines, I said, okay, if this is just printed in one direction, there's going to be a problem with the mitered corners joining. So I had to tell the printers, you know, figure out what you have to do so that when I sew this together, these mitered corners will align. And the other thing was he wanted his signature squiggles and other kinds of shapes, stars or whatever, to be embroidered. And the first thing I'm saying is by hand, but I knew, you know, he would want it done by machine. And I knew of a place on 11th Street, South 11th Street, that's no longer there, that did that kind of embroidery. So what has to happen with that is color cues for the person who is going to do the embroidery, because you will not be there. And I bought thread at Spectre Thread Company down the street from where the old fabric workshop was, at that time 1133 Arch Street, 5th floor. So I took the samples down, I got all of the colors in the amount that was needed, took them to the embroiderers, and I spoke to the man that I guess was the owner, and he wanted me to tell him what I wanted. And I told him, I said, but I need to speak to the person who's going to actually do the work. So I went in the back, I took the thread, which had already, I had already sewn in the areas of the shapes, the color, just loose looping, but so that the person who was doing the work would know exactly what color to use, because in cases like that, some people will say, oh yeah, we can match that, and then when you get it, it's totally a different thing. So it was very important to me to speak to the woman who was going to do the embroidery. So that worked out well. Mo was very pleased with it, because I know there's a photograph in your archives that shows a planning session between the late, great Robert Smith, who was the master printer, Moe Brooker, and myself. And Mo is looking over part of the quilt top to give instructions for what he wants. So it turned out really well, I thought, because mitered corners I didn't think was something. I was really nervous doing the mitered corners because it wasn't something I was used to in the other kind of sewing that I had to do. But it came out well because Mo is a very exact person. And he's the kind of person you want to please. And he's a very nice guy. He can be very exact, but he and I got along. And I'd like to think it's because his grandmother also sewed, and maybe some of that translated into our rapport. But it was a wonderful project, and I have to say to date, even with my own artwork, this is probably the largest quilt type thing that I had worked on. It's very interesting to be standing in front of this quilt the first time since about 1985. And looking at it now, it really makes me understand what a big undertaking it was, and that if I didn't have the tables of the fabric workshop to work on, this either wouldn't have happened or it would have been a lot smaller, because this is definitely a bed-sized quilt. Some of the aspects of the quilt that I remember, especially for the printing process, was that some of these bars, I think almost all of the bars, had a few hand applique areas. And not the whole bar, because whatever was not applique was printed with the dyes and or pigments that were selected by Mo personally. So this long bar, everywhere I'm pointing, was a hand-sewn applique piece. And these small edges that are irregular were part of what Mo wanted to see. And at first when I saw that, I was like, well, I'm not sure, to myself. I didn't say it to him. And then I started thinking about how I would do a neckline curve and, put a stabilizing stitch so that you can cut in and turn along that curve so it's exact. And he was pleased with it. That's all I wanted to hear, was that he was pleased with it. Another aspect of this quilt is the embroidery for the stars and his signature squiggle that appear in this particular piece, but other works of his too, if you're familiar. The thread colors were very, very specific, because I showed Mo a thread chart from Spectre Thread, and he picked out exactly what he wanted. So when I got to the embroiderer, there was a loop of lavender thread, a loop of green thread, several loops of blue thread, and all the other colors that you see that are in fact embroidered. And that was the part of the piece that I really enjoyed the most, because I hadn't had the opportunity to do that with any other project up to that date. Another aspect was consulting with the printers in reference to these stripes matching up on a bordered corner. So each of the corners is mitered. And the stripes that are the decorative element here, same thing they had to fit in just right, especially at the top. Because if you do a mitered corner and it doesn't match up, it's pretty apparent. And even if it's someone that doesn't sew, they might not pick it up, but I knew people coming through the fabric workshop definitely would. So I had to be sure that all of the miters looked good. And I was fascinated with his choice of colors from the borders to this central area, which he did not want stitched through. He wanted it to be poofy. So that was another construction thing to deal with. Okay, how am I going to make this poofy and you don't see things on the back? So, I figured it out, and that's a longer conversation than we probably have for this film, but I was able to do it. And the thing about working at the fabric workshop is that you are pushed, to me, beyond your boundaries, whatever your capabilities are. And with me coming in with an art wearable construction background, I was just able to take those skills and translate them into whatever had to happen for the fabric workshop. And there were some things that I had to even develop because it was something that they had not done before and I had not done before. And I can't remember a time I wasn't able to rise to the occasion. So doing a napkin, after a while, that got to be kind of boring, because I was used to having to solve these kinds of problems. And I'm very glad to be here in Mo's absence to thank him in the ancestral realm for letting me do what I did to realize his project.
My name is Emanuel Kelly. I'm a member of the Fabric Workshops and Museums Board. And my interaction with Mo began on the Art Commission. We both served on the Art Commission from 10 to 12 years, and I can't remember when he was the chair and when I was the chair. But I want to talk about two remembrances. One that's professional and one that is personal. The professional showcases Mo's as a man of principle, and the fact that he could stick to his guns on principle. Whether in the end the other board members totally agreed or not agreed. So intellectually, in talking about aesthetics and so on, he could stick to principles, and he did, and still come to agreement with others. So that's one of the things that stood out there. And stick to his gun, while others disagreed. So the Rocky statue debate was the most controversial debate on the Art Commission that I can remember. And it was covered in the Inquirer and this, that, and the other. But to begin with, I think it was the term when I was the chair. I talked to Gail Harrington at the Philadelphia Museum, and because I had heard that the museum agreed that the Rocky statue could be down low, where there's the beginning of a circle of other sculpture, and I'm going to say commemorative sculpture. Some done by really well-known sculptors, further down the Parkway, down East River Drive is Remington's statue up high looking west, when that was done in the 1800s. And so the theme was looking west, and it was sculpted and crafted very well. And there was, I think, Gaudet, I'm going to say Gaudet, I don't remember his first name, had a small sculpture just to the right of where the Rocky statue eventually we agreed it should be. And then there were some others. And then, of course, further down the East River Drive was the Grant Memorial to the Civil War, and he is a president, done and crafted by a very well-known, gifted sculptor. So associations of themes with the Civil War and other entities, and likewise Gaudet's, I'm going to say Gaudet, everyone will know what I mean. Diana on the interior of the museum at the big steps leading up, scale-wise, and theme, Greek, which represents certain things. So those things were in my mind. And when the sculpture done by, I'm going to say Smith, I think, was done of the memorial to colored soldiers, it was crafted very well in bronze and so on. It reminded me of in Boston, I was in Boston in the early 70s, of the commitment to the Shaw statue of the talented 54th Regiment, which was likewise all black in the beginning of the Civil War. And that association conveyed culturally those African Americans, which were before, segregated. You couldn't be on the main street, this, that, and the other. But that was acknowledged early by Bostonians, some Bostonians, but enough of the leadership to bring that out. And so when I saw the memorial to colored soldiers, I said, oh, we have finally, Philadelphia's consciousness has changed, and finally that's been brought in on the main street with other classic works and so on. And so I thought it was time that, and early on, I think the general public, other than the elite in education and association with art, when you hear the referral, oh, the elite don't want this to be on the main parkway. Those terms get to be purgative, close to that, as a way for the multitude who's not involved in art and so on, see. And so in my mind, I was thinking, well, there's high art and there's low art, but I didn't talk about it in those terms. But I talked about it in the debate between about whether it should be on the parkway. I said there are other things other than, what we call art, high art, well crafted, that over time need to show the engagements of others. And I thought about Lucretia Mott's work, which represents, many things, reflecting Quaker values, education, and abolitionism, and others. And so when that came through, it was, okay, this is cultural, and this is well-crafted statue. It was a commemorative statue. So term of art and commemorative cultural engagement being reflected, and that was a block off the parkway, should be acknowledged. Rocky was a popular hero, an icon of modern times and modern substantial Philadelphia community. And so while it's not art, it is a commemorative statue and ought to be acknowledged. While there's other art on the parkway that is contemporary, and this has come about mainly through Penny Bach and APA, being represented like Mark de Souvreau's Iroquois, which those that are educated in those things can see it as art, contemporary, steel beams and red and so on. And for those that are less educated, they begin to wonder what it's about, those with curiosity and some other things. And there will soon be a third one. And like Cato, when that came in, well, okay, here are these other figures in history around City Hall, commemorative statues to former mayors. I've not looked at them in terms of how skillfully they were done. And General Meade and General Reynolds from the Civil War, very classic, in my mind, sculpture reflecting the 1800s and the Civil War, the role that Pennsylvanians and Philadelphians played in that at many levels. So in my mind, commemorative statues and new cultures in being seen and represented on the parkway had a real contribution to the evolving thinking of more inclusive, but how do you frame it? So it's, that it's not art or high art. Right, so there was a debate, and this was a spirited debate, mainly with Moe, and on the sculpture versus statues with Robert Roche, who was the head of the sculpture department at PAFA. So moving forward, that was the past. So contemporary or reflect. And there's also an art educator, and I can't remember who that was. And that's stipulated in the elevation of the Art Commission and its charter, the city charter, and some other entities. So, but those were the main cast of commissioners with strong opinions. And so when the vote was taken, the majority of the commission said it should be included as a cultural icon reflecting contemporary times, but not as art, right? So anyway, so that's I think was the biggest story that may be of interest to the broader community. The other was a personal occasion that allowed me, and my wife too, to see love in action. A birthday party for his wife, Cheryl McClinney Brooker. And the relationship with them reflected a lot of things. Cheryl has passed, and she had muscular dystrophy or sclerosis. But prior to that, she had a PhD. She had a PhD in art and was head of the education department at the Philadelphia Museum. So I was very pleased when Moe invited me and my wife to join Cheryl and he to recognize her birthday, and his daughter came down from New York. But there were other people that were close to her and somewhat close to him that were her friends. Some were in art and some weren't. And so to see at the table, we were at the restaurant at the end of the Penn's Landing, that's where it was. The table was such that she was at the head of the table, and the guests were flanking that. And so that she was engaged in the middle of, so that she could talk directly with her guests. So that hit me, and it hit my wife. Actually, my wife brought that to my attention. I said, oh, well, that's interesting. And it really showed how much it demonstrated his caring for her. And that attitude in making sure the table was set up for her easily to greet her well-wishers. And so it was not at just that occasion that's the way that he made sure that she was internally involved on other occasions and not on the sidelines. And so he's admirable as a family man, and in his love for his wife. Love and caring, and my wife told me, love in action. And so I thought that might be something to talk about, where she was fully engaged, not on the sideline. There were some other things which Moe, I'll just say one other thing. He was getting work all over. And he had this one project in, I'm going to say, upper New York City suburbs, at a train station that was historical and so on, had good windows and high spaces. And he was selected and engaged to put new stained glass in the windows and so on. And he wanted to talk with me and get my opinion about light and location. And so as he was thinking about what kind of patterns to put in that emit light and block light, or make it less bright in its transmission and so on. And I was honored that he would want to talk to me. So over the years, our debates and discussions about art and architecture and landscape, there was a general respect that grew for understanding of those things. I would say more in the art and sculpture side, I learned a lot from him. And also in the landscape, I learned a lot from Jose Almenino, and other views of sculpture from Rob Roche Reich. And so the exchange, even in talking about principles in organization, in the architecture. It was a learning experience. It expanded my sense of other possibilities, and it expanded their sense of when to follow something from me and when there's opportunities to contrast and so on. So that was a very good time for the Art Commission and for the relationships and respect that were built. So those are my thoughts on two major remembrances, professional and personal. Actually, and he actually gave me one of his paintings. You know, it wasn't that big, but it was about that. I was honored that that was his way of showing me how much he appreciated my being a colleague and a friend. And it's something I valued very much, too. I'm sitting in front of Moe's first work here for the fabric workshop and later museum, which he was an artist in residence, which I didn't know about beginning in '85, his relationship with Kippy, which I was informed by Christina Roberts, and it's on exhibit here. So this is where he began to explore his abstract way of handling, much more geometric and so on, and his love of color, which expanded tremendously over the years. And that his last work was at 6 and Arch, in which he was selected as the artist for the main lobby in the federal GSA program, Design Excellence, which involves architects in renovations, but always art involved as a part of that and all the projects they do all across the country. And so local, sometimes, artists that are at that level get selected. That is beyond the local, their understanding and expression of in what place to represent certain approaches. So now on exhibit in the federal building at 6th and Arch Street, one can visit and see his latest work, which is reflects his history of experience of expanding his view of color and larger abstract paintings. And you can see from earlier where he's expanded and grown. Wonderful, simply wonderful. At one time, and I still am, on the Design Excellence peer review program, I got to see that process and work in different areas of the country. And local artists for certain projects and difference. It's not just painting or something, it's multi-dimensional, new materials and so on that really enhance the spaces. Right, so I appreciated that he was selected here in Philadelphia very much.